Great. All right, well, hi everybody. I am Ashley, the founder of Birthsmarter, and we provide childbirth education classes and support groups and these weekly conversations for pregnant and postpartum families and birth workers. And we're really in this space to both make birth better for families and then help families go through some self-improvement and betterment through the of childbirth and the early postpartum days that are really transformative. And centering pregnancy fits with this model so perfectly, and I'm so excited for the conversation today. Wenonah and I met through a community conversation, and I found out that she worked in centering groups and was really thrilled because my experience with centering started, it's very minimal, so this conversation is for me too, but it started about 7 years ago when my sister-in-law facilitated a centering pregnancy group in New York City, and I had just done a doula training and was invited into the centering group with a few other newer doulas to explain what doulas did and offer services, and was just really mesmerized by the idea that many pregnant people were in the room at the same time learning and talking to their medical providers. So it was this combination between support group and childbirth class and prenatal visit, and read some of the materials that she had and filed it away. But as I've become more committed to figuring out how we can really help address the maternal health care crisis in the United States, it's resurged as an area of interest for me. And so I don't do a lot of talking. I'm going to be watching the chat box and facilitating. If you have any questions, you can direct them to me or to Wenonah or Malika, but they'll be talking, so I might be better able to screen questions. So I'm going to pass it over to the two of you to introduce yourselves and present. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat box at any time, but we are definitely going to leave time at the end explicitly for questions and just open dialogue, because that's one of the best parts of the series. All right, I turn it over to you guys.
Thanks, Ashley. So welcome everybody. It's nice to see some familiar faces on here, and also excited to share about what I do and do this conversation with Malika. I am, for the past 7 years, I've been leading centering groups and participating in offering care through this group model in a clinic where midwives are the providers. So we do centering pregnancy. And in the last couple of years, we've started doing centering parenting, which is a pediatric visit with a family practice doctor. So my background is that I've just always had a fair amount of interest in birth, and became a doula and became a childbirth educator after working in a birth center for a number of years as an administrative person. So Malika, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Malika Hodge. I am from New York City originally, although I had more than a short stint in Boston as well. So I've lived around a couple of places as well. And I come to this work. I'm the New York City Program Manager at Centering Healthcare Institute. And I come to this work from a public health perspective, in addition to doing doula work like Wenonah, and also I'm a certified lactation consultant. And I also do a lot of anti-racism and social justice work in the city, and I've done it also internationally because I was a former Peace Corps volunteer as well. And yeah, we're just really excited to be able to share what we've learned, and I'm excited to share this space with Wenonah as well, who's actually been implementing groups, because I do a lot of external support for sites throughout New York City to basically improve birth outcomes for Black and Brown women in particular. But this model is really amazing because it's accessible and it's great for all women. But coming at it from a reproductive justice lens, it's really powerful to think about who's the most vulnerable people in spaces like these.
Thank you. So I just remembered myself to add my pronouns. So I invite you guys, if you have a preferred name or would like to add your pronouns, you can right click or tap on your screen, right click over your video square, and you should see an option to rename. If you're on a tablet, sometimes you have to go into, I always forget what it says, but down at the bottom, I think it's like more, if somebody can help me out if they're looking at a tablet, if you need that instruction. But it's just helpful for us to know what to call you. And like Ashley said, when we're doing these talks, it is very helpful to see faces and to connect that way. So we invite you to turn on your video if you're able to, but it's okay to leave it off and just listen as well. So I do want to invite us into this space and just kind of orient yourself and center yourself. That means connecting to where you are seated and maybe noticing where your feet are. I always like to say to be where your feet are. And so that reminds us that we are in our bodies, that we are connected to this physical space. You could even look around your space and notice colors, shapes. That just orients you to time and place and not just out there somewhere in the ethers. But it's nice that we can all be together in this virtual space. The other tip that I have for you is if you're able to put your view on gallery view so that you're not just looking at the person talking, but you can have a look at how many people are in this space. Some of them are just names, but we have a fair group of people that have come together today to enjoy this talk. I am curious if anybody has experience with centering. You can either raise your hand if you're on video, or under the participants button, there's a way to raise your hand. You can click on that and raise hand. So just to give us an idea if anybody here listening has some experience with centering. And Malika, do you want to talk about just the agreements that we're making by being here together?
Sure. So part of this presentation too is also modeling the way that we learn in an interactive space in centering. That's really key, the community building aspect, where we'll kind of emphasize that a little bit more later. But to get us started and just provide a framework, we always start with some sort of community agreements. And we just want people to know what they're consenting to in this space, right? So right now in this space, we're saying that folks that are here are consenting to practicing engagement and presence while Wenonah and I are presenting, participating by using your voice and or the chat. So we understand that some folks have children at home and different things going on, but we still would encourage your participation. So please feel free to use the chat, or as Wenonah already referred to, using the raised hand signal as well is really helpful for us. And we want your input and feedback, because we respect, just like with centering, we respect that everybody's experts in the space. And we're also asking you to commit to ask questions when you have them. So as questions arise, great, you can put them in the chat. You can voice them out if you feel comfortable. Later on, we're also going to provide our contact information if things start to bubble a little bit later, that you can still reach out to one of us if you have further questions about it. Is everybody good? If those on camera can give me a thumbs if that was clear. Feeling good? And then those off camera, again, if anything comes up, we highly encourage you to let us know what's going on, because we want to make sure that everybody's feeling included. Okay. So now we're going to move into doing a short activity. As already mentioned, a big part of centering is experiencing being in community in this way. And so before we break out, I just want to let you know what we're going to be doing. So basically, you're going to be paired up with someone that you don't know, right? Or the goal is that you don't know. And with that person, you're going to state your name, your pronouns, your role, and you're going to finish the statement birth is. So I'm also going to put that in the chat in a little bit. But the caveat to this activity is that it's going to be 3 minutes long, and you're going to take turns being speaker and listener. So each person will have an opportunity to be the speaker for about 1 minute and 30 seconds, and vice versa. Does that make sense? If you're clear on that, give me a thumbs, or a virtual thumbs, or an actual thumbs. Great, 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 great. So again, we have 3 minutes. You'll figure out which your pair, who's gonna do what. Ashley's gonna separate us into groups in a little bit.
I just want to add to that, Malika, that to avoid the temptation to do the small talk that we usually do when we're face to face with somebody that you don't know, the space filler of how are you doing, what's going on, and just get right into the meat of learning something about somebody else. And it's really a listening activity. So you are going to want to take some mental notes and remember what you heard, because it's going to be your job when we come back into this space to introduce the person, or possibly just give us some notes about what you heard. What was the person saying in terms of their perspective on birth? So finishing the statement, birth is really about what's your relationship to it? Where are you coming? What's important? That kind of thing. Go ahead, Ashley.
Hold on, I'm gonna put the stuff in the chat quickly because I understand it's important to have like a visual for some folks.
I was just gonna say also that if somebody can't participate, what we said was, like, if you're watching in the background, then the person that's in the room, I'm gonna try and match it so that folks with video on are together, but you can answer those questions for yourself is what Wenonah was saying, right? And then just come back with that. And Malika, you can also broadcast it. I can show you how to do that. So when everybody's in the rooms. Okay, you're gonna get an invitation to move to a room. Yeah.
We use these breakout groups in our centering virtual sessions because it is a nice way to get to know somebody easily. So I see lots more faces this time, which is fun. I got to meet Marina's little grandson there. So we were hoping, what I'd love for everyone to do is just type in the chat some of the words you heard to complete the sentence birth is. And then if we can get a few people who would be brave or volunteer to share who they met and introduce that person and tell us what you heard your new friend say about what they believe birth is. If you would like to do that, could you unmute yourself and let us know who you met? Theodora.
Hi, everyone. I met Stephanie, and Stephanie lives in Texas. She has been a labor and delivery nurse for a long time, and she said birth is beautiful and powerful, and it's definitely one of her passions.
Thank you. And Stephanie, could you introduce your friend?
Yes, this is Theodora, and she is a birth doula, and she is working out of Brooklyn right now and taking a small little break, but the main word that she used to describe birth is transformational.
Thank you. Yeah, transformative is definitely coming up a lot in the chat, and that was what I heard in the conversation I was in as well. Do we have one more person who could introduce someone that they met? Oh, thanks, Marcia.
Yeah, okay. So I met Eileen, and she is living in Tucson and is a postpartum doula. Our computer froze a little bit, so I missed a fair amount of what she said, but she did use the word transformative and transformation for birth.
Thank you. Eileen, were you able to hear any of what Marcia introduced herself?
Yes. So Marcia lives in Oakland. She was a pediatric nurse and worked in public health as well. And her perspective was the fact that she not only herself imagined what it was like because she had not had children of her own, but she also watched as mothers were birthing and families were growing, the beauty of the imagination as to what their future would hold.
For that, that's really lovely.
If it's okay, Wenonah, before we move on,
Yeah.
I'm realizing that we have people in this space from all different places. So if you want to like put in the chat where are you calling in from, that would be really cool just to see where people are.
Yeah. And I wanted to just go back and read a few more words from birth is powerful, beautiful, incredible if all the conditions are set up. We heard transformative a lot. Birth is imaginative, the wonder of the event and the future. And then let's see, we've got people from Bronx, Brooklyn, Tucson, Boulder, Colorado, lots of Tucson folks showing up. And Salt Lake City and San Antonio, Texas. So we've got coast to coast. Awesome. So I just wanted to just kind of point out that when we start to make these connections with another person, you might notice that you're a little more relaxed, a little more at ease. So we really try to use that knowledge that when we make a connection with another person, that it really brings us into a space of being able to open up a little bit more. So that kind of sets the tone for moving into a learning experience, moving into a conversation, that we're warming up for getting our juices flowing and talking about birth. So we've all kind of gotten to that place together. So I think we should move into the slides, Malika, and talk about centering for a little bit and let people know what we do. Does that sound good?
Good. And what are folks noticing before I do the slides? What are folks noticing about how you're feeling in your body now as opposed to when you first entered this space? You can unmute and shout it out. You can use the chat. Better, happier, friendlier, more at ease, right? So we're seeing that, especially we're talking a lot about birthing and bringing people together in community. Feeling more relaxed, right, is really key and important. Like, how do we create this inclusive space? And we can still do it virtually, right? So although it's not the same as being in person, we can still do it virtually, and we're unmasked when we're doing it. So it's great. We can see people's smiles, and we can, right? And we can read body language from the upper part, which we can't do in a lot of places because we're masked most of the time nowadays. All right, so now I'm going to share my screen. So we are going to show a bit of a PowerPoint presentation, but we're still encouraging everyone's participation and to use the chat and to raise your hand. We'll try to pause if people want to put in any input. So we still want to make this as integrative as possible. Give me 1 second. I don't know why my computer's acting funny. It's frozen. Can you also see me? Oh, I froze.
We have a black screen.
You have a black screen. I feel like some of you have froze on my screen.
Your audio is working fine, but your video is frozen. If you stop the share and then start it again, it may work. There you go. Now we can see.
Can see it? Okay. Sorry you all for the technical difficulties. All right. All right, so then again, I just wanted to quickly introduce myself again. Again, my name is Malika Hodge. I work at Centering Healthcare Institute and I'm primarily based in New York City and helping sites, hospitals throughout New York City with implementing centering for the past like 1.5 years. And Wenonah's here. Wenonah, do you want to interject a little bit?
As far as where I'm at?
Yeah, where you're at.
Yeah, I'm at a federally qualified health center. So we have a really large patient population that we serve. I think it's 10% of the whole city of Tucson. And my role is under the midwifery program, and I run the centering groups that our midwives lead for pregnant patients. And we are just getting back to doing centering parenting with our family practice doctors.
So we're going to be talking about centering. We're going to be having a discussion collaboratively and talking about centering. And I'm going to primarily be giving you all a framework. And it's great that Wenonah's here because she's actually doing the implementation process from within a healthcare system. So it'll be a really nice complement to the framework that I'm going to provide. Hold on, I'm having a hard time flipping. All right. So centering healthcare, I'm sorry, y'all. So centering healthcare is a healthcare visit, but it's different. Centering healthcare is unique because it's an evidence-based, patient-centered framework for providing healthcare in a group format. And Centering Healthcare, again, like the organization's name is Centering Healthcare Institute. And under Centering Healthcare Institute, there are 3 models of care that we provide: Centering Pregnancy, our framework, Centering Parenting, and Centering Healthcare. So Centering Pregnancy and Parenting is primarily what we're going to focus on today. I'm noticing that there's a spelling error in Centering Pregnancy, so please bear with me. But that's usually the model that's most popular. But again, we also have these other models as well, because this is a very comprehensive, right, healthcare visit that can be applicable to a lot of different healthcare arenas. It's a clinical intervention implemented by healthcare providers. Again, it's still a visit, it's still a billable visit. And it uses the healthcare visit as a touch point for engaging patients in their own care and also connecting patients to other patients. And also it's a way to bring a public health scope into the clinical environment as well, because doctors are also in the space to learn, and nurse midwives as well. and it's replacing individual appointments with group appointments. However, individual appointments can still be used to supplement. So it's not a tit for tat, right? You're still having this comprehensive holistic care model that's being offered to you, but you're still able to also sprinkle in individual appointments. Let's say if a patient, right, was high risk or whatever it is, like you're still getting more care, you're not getting less care. So as I mentioned, there are 3 models, and right now we have a quick little video that's gonna have the patient perspective from women who experience the centering parenting model. So I'm going to play that. Give me a minute. I'm only gonna play about like 2 minutes and 8 seconds of this. Hold on. Can you hear it okay? Give me 1 second. I'm gonna stop sharing and restart on my screen.
Do you want to just maybe skip that one, Malika, and move on? I think she might be having some internet connection problems because she looks frozen. She's actually saying that her internet or her computer just logged off. So Ashley, are you able to share with me to be one of the co-presenters?
Yeah, that should work now.
She is getting logged back on, so man, sorry about this, guys. Actually, maybe while we're waiting for her to come back in, I can just talk a little bit about what we're doing. And I also invited one of my centering clients to be here. She's a patient of ours who has had 2 children, and her partner did centering twice. So they did it with both of their pregnancies, and then they did it again for centering parenting. So Evelyn, do you want to unmute yourself and say hi? We can just do this intro here instead of later.
Hi.
So, I mean, the video is showing patient perspective, and maybe you could just fill in a little bit of that and say why centering helped you, what it felt like to be in a group. And is Donovan there with you too?
Yes.
Awesome. Hi, Donovan.
Hey.
And you guys you have a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, almost 4-year-old, right?
Almost 4, yeah. She turns 4 next month, so we're super excited for that. Yeah, so we chose centering because we wanted to try something different. It was offered at the birthing center place that we were at, so we decided to try it. What we were told when we were approached about it was that it was just a whole bunch of other ladies that were pregnant at the same time, due around the same time. So we thought it would be a cool experience to have our first child and experience it with other women that were going through the exact same thing. We ended up doing it the second time because we had so much fun the first time, and we felt so empowered as parents coming in and coming out. We were able to ask a lot of questions, talk about it with other females that were going through the exact same thing we were. So it was a lot of fun, and you just learn from different types of people, races, cultures. We had a whole bunch of different, it was just a lot of fun.
Great. Yeah. And Donovan, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Because I love to hear from our dads in the group too.
Oh, she hit it around the head. It's from just to hear from different cultures, different parents, first-time parents, second, third-time parents. just getting little insights on what it is actually like to be a parent and not like what you see on TV or like just random things you may hear that may be false, you know. It's
Right.
cool. Good source of information.
So you came into it, you know, wanting to learn more and hear what other people were doing, and then coming into it with your second baby, you sort of got to be that expert in the room a little bit because you had already been through it one time. And that's the nice thing.
It's definitely a lot of fun, especially the second time because we had went through it the first time, so we
Right.
kind of knew what to expect and different things like that. But we still learned new things. It was cool because every time we went in for a centering, he had to do my blood pressure, and you know, so it was just different than a regular doctor's appointment, and so it was definitely more homey. You're more relaxed. You get little snacks here and there.
Right. We have 2 hours in the session with all of your time is being spent really effectively. Like you come in, you do your own vitals. We teach you how to do that at the beginning. So the patient, you as a patient are being engaged, participatory in your own healthcare and your own well-being, and your partner's participating in that too. And so you have this 2 hour spent where you're doing something interactive the whole time or socializing, and that's important too. So thanks for giving us that perspective. I think it's really helpful to hear from somebody who's been through it before, who's participated, and to give us that aspect. So I think we can skip the video and we can just go into
You made friends.
and you made friends. That's awesome. Yeah.
Still have the pictures that we took with both of the group.
Aww, that's really sweet. Thank you guys so much. So let's see, Malika's getting this back up into, you're muted. I can't hear you. Oh, there it goes. Okay.
There we go.
Malika, do you want me to pull the slideshow up or are you getting it?
I'm just trying to figure out. Give me one moment. You have it up already, Wenonah?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, if you want to share it, that's fine.
Let me just get to the right spot here. Okay.
So again, thank you all so much for bearing with me with the technology. Hopefully there won't be any more issues. And also thank you so much for sharing personal perspectives of being in centering, because I think that even transcends even better than the video hearing from Evelyn and her partner, right? So as touched upon already, the core components of centering are the health assessment, which is still happening. Again, it's still a billable healthcare visit. But the difference also from a traditional visit, as Evelyn already mentioned, is that you're walking in and you're also helping to, you're also engaged in your own care, right? So you're taking your vitals, you're recording your information for your blood pressure and your weight. And if you're doing centering parenting, you're also doing it for baby, as you can see in the picture over here. We have a young dad that is recording the baby's weight, right? So it's moving away from it just being the doctor doing things to you being a part of your own care team. There's also the interactive learning component. As you can see here from the picture, there's a lot of sitting in circles and in community. Food is very important, right? So when we pre-COVID, right, we were able to meet in person and have snacks to encourage community and to make sure that folks are all learning from one another, including the health provider. And we're getting to this place where the interactive learning is also, well, we're all learning, right? Even my provider is learning from me and I'm learning from the provider, and I'm helping to share with other women and birthing persons in the circle as well. And again, the interactive learning component really helps with the community building component, because we're not perceiving folks as empty vaults, like they're walking in with nothing to share and they're just being spoken at, right? You're engaged as well. You have things to share. And that really helps with the dynamics of building community and friendship, and sometimes even lasting relationships. There's some groups that are still continuing to talk. Even when COVID happened and some groups had to be put on pause, groups were still using WhatsApp and Facebook and different things to communicate and support one another. Evelyn, do you have anything to add about the community building component of it? Make sure you unmute yourself.
Yeah, honestly, I like being in the community. That's one of the things why I wanted to do centering, just to have that different aspect, meet different people in the community, and, you know, get out there. So.
Thank you. I'm going to pull you in some more because your perspective is so important. And if you can go to the next slide, Wenonah, please. And so, you know, the patient benefits are just immense, right? As Emmeline has already mentioned. So there's better outcomes for birthing parent and babies. You get to meet and share with other folks. You're spending 10 times more time with your providers than a traditional healthcare visit, right? Because the average traditional visit is about 15 to 20 minutes. You know, typically you go into the doctor, it's a touch and go, it's real quick. But here you're coming in, you're now waiting in the waiting room, you're going straight into a space, whether it's an in-person space or a virtual space, right? There's no waiting, right? It's already here, everything is comprehensive, and there's always learning or some activity that's going on. So centering is 100% productive. You never have to wait. All appointments are pre-scheduled, so you kind of know what to expect. And this really helps with those of us in the space who understand a lot around like trauma-informed care. Like people need to know what to expect and how long they're going to be in a space. And the sessions are informative and fun, and they're also influenced by the needs of the participants. So I see Evelyn is nodding her head a lot. Is there anything you wanted to add, Evelyn?
Yes, no, honestly, that's why with our first child, we chose centering, because it was a longer appointment. We had went to our first appointment and it was like she said, a touch and goes base. And so that's when we moved over to midwives, and they're so much more engaged with your pregnancy opposed to like a doctor where you're just another patient. With midwives, you know, they know your birth plan, they know your name, you know, you're not just another patient. And so to have, and they care about your birth plan, they want to go exactly how you are. And then being in their centering group, you get to hear what other people are going through, what other birth plans are, how everyone else is dealing and handling the same thing that you're going through. And so it was just a fun experience to go through, which is why we did it twice.
Mm-hmm. And if we can go to the next slide, Wenonah, thank you. So a big part of this too is centering both saves lives and it also saves money. You can see here in this diagram, can anybody call out what they're noticing with this diagram here? What are we seeing? Or you can put it in the chat as well.
The preterm birth is going down with both Black and white families.
And you're noticing too, what else, anybody else noticing anything else there?
With centering.
Well, they're really going together. Especially the Black birth rate is almost the same as the white preterm birth rate, which is amazing. It's great.
And a lot of this information is coming out of some published randomized controlled trial studies that were done in 2007, and a lot of it's still very prevalent today, and in South Carolina as well. There was another research team that found a 47% decrease in the risk of preterm birth. And for those of us that are already involved in the birthing space, you know, we have immense issues with women in general, and it even gets worse when we start talking about Black women in particular, right? So centering is a real helpful intervention to really close this racial disparity gap that's happening in birth. So it has immense potential to do that, and there's an immense need for it now, especially since COVID is also exacerbating a lot of poor birth outcomes that are happening as well. Next slide, please. Anything else? Because Wenonah is about to talk about what this looks like on the ground, which is really beautiful. And I know Evelyn's going to chime in. Evelyn, what's your partner's name?
Donovan.
Donovan, I want to see your face too. I'm sure Donovan's going to chime in.
Hey.
So don't be afraid to chime in.
Okay.
So and this is beautiful because you're seeing the data and the framework, but now you're going to hear about it in real time.
I wanted to add that the health outcome statistics that improve are also breastfeeding rates and low birth weight babies. So if we have less preterm babies, we have less babies that are born below birth weight or that aren't low birth weight, that are average or normal. So it does improve by giving patients the feeling that they're empowered in their healthcare. They can stand up for what they want. They can speak to what is needed. They have all this information by going through 10 visits with their provider that lasts 2 hours long, and the learning goes along with the well check. So one of the things that I really love about the centering groups is that for our clientele, the dads really do get involved, and it really brings the support people into the picture more. If you go into a regular clinic visit, you're often, the provider is talking to the mom or even talking to the belly, the pregnant belly. It's not even about the person who's pregnant. So in centering, we're really humanizing this medical visit. We're interacting in a different way. And it gives patients the feeling that they're in charge of their health care. So if you visualize what an in-person group would look like, of course, this is different now that we're in pandemic times and we're not doing this in person anymore at the moment. Some places have gone back to it. But just from looking at this picture and thinking about what you traditionally would think of when you think of education class, childbirth class, what can you point out that's different in this visual than your typical thought of going to a class? And you can either unmute and answer or put it in the chat. Just kind of what are your ideas about what this looks like, feels like, what the physical space means to the participants?
Sitting in a circle.
Exactly. Yeah, if we've got the people in a circle rather than rows of chairs where everybody's facing one direction, this circle equalizes everyone in the group, and the provider and the facilitator are part of this circle. So we actually ask our providers to, not wear their medical garb, take off your badge that you would normally wear in your clinic space. Take off your white coat because that reduces the anxiety that some people have about going to the doctor. And instead of the provider being the expert, it equalizes the provider with the group so that the group feel like they're experts as well. And it takes away that hierarchy, because often in a medical dynamic, the doctor is the expert and has the final word, and the patient is supposed to be compliant and do what they're told. And we're changing that paradigm by involving patients in their direction of their care, their patient plan, further understanding of what's happening in their care. So in addition to that, we make it really fun. This is a picture from our first centering group that did centering parenting. And these folks did, they went through 2 birthdays together. They had so many milestones going from newborn stage to 2 years old.
It's quick.
In the centering parenting model, these babies are coming in for a visit every time they're due for their vaccine. So it follows the American Academy of Pediatrics. And during this 2-hour session, each baby gets a little time with the provider. So that the parents, when they're in that one-on-one session with the provider, they get to ask questions, they get to address things that are happening with their child. So each session we have a set plan that we're gonna, follow these topics, and then we keep this parking lot. And when we're doing this virtually, the chat kind of is our parking lot. So we've been asking you guys to put questions in the chat box, and that's how we keep track of what kinds of things we need to address. And if you look at the picture of the agenda, the picture of the parking lot questions, there is some overlap. So often parents are asking questions, obviously, that are age appropriate, and we're following a plan to where we're going to be focusing on what the milestones are at that developmental stage. So we're talking about the transition of feeding solids and thinking about when should my baby be walking. And as the parents hear questions from other parents, they get either inspired to remember that they wanted to ask about that, or they feel better because they were also struggling with that, or, you know, they learned something that maybe they haven't come to that stage yet, but they're going to be, you know, having to think about that at some point. And even things that might be a little taboo or something, penis pulling is on this list. You know, kids come up with some crazy things. And sometimes for parents, you know, there might be things that feel like, I don't know if I want to ask somebody else that I know about that, because is it okay? Is this supposed to be happening? And everything just gets really normalized in centering. So we come up with some fun activities to keep the kids engaged, especially when they're getting older to this toddlerhood stage. We thought this rice activity would be really great fun, and it absolutely was, but it was a mess like I've never seen before. But the point is to keep people having fun. The parents were able to talk while the kids were playing. And the providers really get to look what's happening in these interactions between the children and another child, or between the parents and the children. So it gives a whole new perspective to what the provider is actually able to learn about their patient. And the provider is also really deepening their relationship with their patients in a different way than they would be able to do in a clinic visit. So I'm kind of trying to skip through these slides a little bit because we've got time running out. So we wanted to just, you know, show you kind of what it looks like in terms of how we're doing these virtually. Essentially, you are participating sort of in a centering group. We're trying to use a lot of the framework that we use for centering. In this session, we of course have a lot more information that we're didactically sharing with you. But I do use slideshows in my centering groups, and it's especially helpful with the COVID, you know, doing it virtually, because the other ways that we normally would interact in a group, doing demonstrations or having people work in small groups, we're making adjustments and doing that in a virtual space. So using the chat, using breakout groups, we're going to do a little activity to show you how interactive we can be, like with the whiteboard. But this is my favorite session, when all the babies are born and we come back together. The parents get to talk about their birth stories, like Evelyn and Donovan were saying. You kind of learn about, well, what happens when the babies actually are born, and the way that due dates come and babies come either before or close to or after their due date. Some babies are born before we finish our centering group, so we do actually get to sometimes hear these stories, and patients can sort of have this real-time learning about what to expect in their birth, while we're also trying to always remind them that your experience will probably be nothing like this, because every birth is different. So one of the ways that we use, you know, interactive learning is we can engage the patients or the participants to do something with their computer, not just sit there and listen, or not just be wondering about when it's okay to unmute themselves and add something to the conversation. So just like in a classroom, we would get up and write stuff on a whiteboard, we use this in our virtual sessions as well. So all of you have an annotate button on your screen. If you hover up above where it says you are sharing Wenonah's screen, you can see annotate. And if you're on a tablet, you just have to tap the screen and tap on the little pencil.
It's under view options. Like, so there's the green bar and then there's the gray bar. And if you click on that arrow, it'll pop up and you can go down to annotate.
Perfect. So what we want to do is match the symptoms to the level of postpartum disorder. So if you can see something like psychosis, we would want to say hearing voices goes with psychosis. Somebody's having lots of fun with that. So let's try to draw the lines from what matches the symptoms to the different levels of postpartum stages of perinatal mood disorder, anxiety, depression. So we kind of get these definitions, we talk about it with the group, And we do our teaching that way. You guys are doing awesome. And then we can move into talking about, well, if you're dealing with something like this, you know, what can help? And the way that I would frame that is, think about if you had a friend that came to you and said that they were just feeling really overwhelmed with everything that was going on. They were having a hard time coping. They cried all the time and they just didn't know what to do. So if your friend was saying that to you, what would be something that you might counsel them, or how would you give them advice, and what would be something you would say that might help? And I would love to hear some replies. If you want to unmute yourself, or if you want to type it in the chat, that can help too. What's one thing that might help if somebody was feeling especially overwhelmed with a new baby? So what about talking to your provider? That would be one thing that I would recommend. I do see some stuff in the chat here. Let's see. Cook a meal for them. Yeah, organizing a meal train. So that's one less thing they have to think about. Finding a good therapist. Absolutely. And just listen. Yeah, that's so much what new moms need, is just somebody to hear them and not tell them how to fix it. So yeah, through all of us thinking about it together, we can come up with some really awesome ways to think about how can we help with this issue. So I'm gonna move on to the next slide. Thank you for playing along with that. Oops, let's see. Clear, okay. So I'm gonna turn it back to Malika, and you can kind of orient people to what they can do next. And we can spend a few minutes on answering questions. We tried to be really interactive, so we didn't end up with a long amount of time for questions, but if you have any questions and you can type them in the chat, that would be super helpful.
And I think what might be helpful here, Wenonah, if you stop sharing, and then maybe we can send the slides over to Ashley.
Okay.
So that way we can see everybody's face.
Yeah.
So it feels so much better. So we try in Centering to not use PowerPoints as much, but because for the sake of this presentation, because we're providing you all with some information in a very short time, that's why we did that. But I love the way that Wenonah was able to kind of engage with us in playing different interactive activities. As you can see, there's ways that we can utilize the chat. So this model is really applicable for a lot of different types of communities. In New York City, one of the things that we noticed was just that there's just so many variances among like race and culture, even literacy, right? And so anyone who does centering, we really try to work with them and support them in thinking about what does your patient population need? Because everybody's patient population looks different. And what works for Wenonah and Leo might not work for a population in New York City where people maybe speak Spanish or Bengali, right? But there's a way we can still bring people into even a virtual space and make it sure that it's inclusive for everyone that's there. And I think one of the things that's really unique about this presentation is that most of you here are either involved in birth work, but not really in the clinical realm is what I'm gathering. I'm very similar to me, like I'm a doula. Wenonah is a doula, but also doing public health work, and there's different people engaged here. So this is the first time we're really talking to audiences that are not clinical providers. And so one of the things we wanted to kind of brainstorm really quickly while we have like about 4 minutes is now that you've heard this information, right? What are some of the things that you would like to do next that you've heard about centering, the different models? What is your plan now that you have this information?
I do just want to touch on a question that's in the chat and how people can get involved in centering. So you can look on Centering's website, and in Tucson, the El Rio Clinic is the only place that's offering this program. Hospitals or doctors' offices go through a process of being accredited or approved to offer the centering information. So if people in Tucson are interested in centering, they would come to El Rio and register with the midwives for their prenatal care. And as far as the program being in other languages, yes, we do. Typically we offer Spanish here in Tucson and maybe in other communities where other languages are more prevalent, I think providers would sometimes offer centering in that language.
And there's a question in particular about Tucson from Bonnie. Did you see that, Wenonah, about how can women become eligible for centering?
Yeah, I would say that they would come and register as a patient at El Rio because we're the only site. Otherwise, what you were getting at, Malika, is that if patients are interested in getting this type of care, you know, they can talk to their provider and say, why aren't you offering centering? I learned about this really amazing program and let me give you some information, and here's their website. Because CHI is really interested in helping this spread and helping organizations get more involved.
Malika, can you just speak to what does the process look like for that? If we talk to providers about centering, how long does it take? Is there additional training for them? Like just briefly, what does the process look like for bringing centering into our communities?
So bringing centering, so right now the impetus is often, at least in New York City, the Department of Health was the one that kind of galvanized hospitals to develop centering. What's powerful about this moment here today is that we're trying to also find ways that we can pressure the system from the patient perspective as well. So either way, wherever the pressure comes from, and once the system is pushed to do centering, they're gonna have to go through a series of like trainings and basically a systems change within the OBGYN department or the midwifery department to develop centering, right? So they're gonna, because it's a completely different orientation to how they typically do care, right? We educate them, and Lynn's on this call as well. Lynn, can you wave so everybody can see you? So Lynn's on this call as well. And so we're doing a lot of work with even facilitative leadership, right? So how do we make it that whenever we're engaged with the patient, that it's in a facilitative way and that we're shifting the power dynamic? Because so much of this is building like a safe and inclusive environment so that it could end up where birth outcomes are more positive, right? Because we have so many issues with birth in the United States. So it's really a helpful intervention. And it's really a heavy lift. Wenonah has been doing this, like as she mentioned, for 7 years. And it takes a while for a system to develop a new way of doing things because it's a whole cultural shift that goes on, and it's an ongoing process that isn't perfect. So I think it's really helpful for patients, just like a lot of hospitals have now safe environments for breastfeeding, right? A lot of that came too also from communities and patients saying, hey, why isn't your hospital breastfeeding friendly? If it's not breastfeeding friendly, I'm not gonna go there as a customer. I want a breastfeeding friendly hospital, right? So I think it's really important to always remember too that as consumers, as patients, that we could also shift things, but it has to be a concerted effort. It can't just be one person asking for it, right? So I know some people are heavily involved in their birthing communities, wherever you live. So it might be really helpful too to like educate other folks, or if you have any connections with providers or hospitals in your community, to really bring this to their attention, because some people don't know about centering, right? Some people don't know that there's an evidence-based model and there's an alternative way to give care. Any thoughts on, I know I'm talking a lot, so any thoughts on what I just said or questions? And sometimes there is federal funding that is coming in too. There's a lot, centering's on a lot of policy agendas because, as we already mentioned, it's a really helpful intervention to closing the racial disparity gap in birth. And so, yeah, there's tons of federal funding that is coming through that can go to healthcare institutions to help them along with this process, because it is a heavy lift, but it's not impossible, right? And especially if you remind providers in the healthcare system within itself of the benefits that can come out of this, and even transforming healthcare systems relationships to the community. Because as we know, I live in New York City, and there's a lot of hospitals that people don't feel safe going to and giving birth at, right? But if we can show communities as well, like healthcare institutions can show that, hey, we do care, we are invested because we want to do things in a different way. It might help to build trust in the communities as well.
I do want to just note that we're at the end of our time, so I don't want to keep people longer than we said. We would be here just for 1 hour, right, Ashley?
Yeah, if you guys have another minute, that's fine with me, but people should feel free to go whenever they have to, yeah.
There is some links in the chat, and in addition to federal funding being available, Centering has some grants out there for practices that are looking to implement this. And we really recommend that, you know, if people are interested, that they either get in touch with Malika or I, or find Centering's information on their website. I just see that last question about home visitation, and for Centering, it really isn't that. I know there's nurse family partnership and things that are happening that are another kind of, you know, intervention. But no, Centering doesn't involve home visits. It's just the clinic. So we can share the slides, right, Malika? Someone asked if we could share the slides, and we could send those to you, Ashley, and you could make them available somewhere.
Yep. I definitely can email them to everybody. Can I ask you one more question just before you go? So if Birthsmarter interacts with a lot of students who, when they move through our classes, realize that they want to change providers, like that's one of the most common things that we're dealing with. So if I'm directing people to looking for centering in their community, is it fair to assume that the midwives and OBs that would choose to participate in centering are, like, without vetting them, going to be providers that are going to intervene less medically in birth and have like a more progressive model of care? Is that not a fair assumption to make? Like, how, like, is the fact that they're participating in centering meaningful for their birth practices or not?
I think it can be, but I can't sit here and definitively say that it is. I think it increases the likelihood though, right? Because if we're getting people, and even if some people we're convincing still as they're working through this model, because sometimes they're getting money and they're being pushed to do it. So there's some resistance initially, as with anything new, right? Within a system that's very, very archaic. Sometimes people are very resistant until they start to experience it for themselves. And then it starts to shift things in them. But I think that behavioral change takes a while, because if you think a way people are medically trained, right, it's like second nature for them to do the procedures and protocols that they're doing. So the unlearning process takes a while, but I think people are more receptive to learning different ways of doing things. Would you say that's true, Wenonah, for the providers that you interact with?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think even from a midwifery standpoint, there was some adjustments having to be made in terms of implementing this sort of different paradigm. To answer your question, Ashley, I think a practice doing centering is believing in the paradigm of empowering patients. So, you know, I feel like that would be the case to some degree, but I think practices may have their own sort of culture that stands above the centering program. It's not necessarily going to change everything that's happening within that dynamic.
But it's a start.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, people are hopping off. You are both such incredible facilitators, not surprisingly. Thank you so much for sharing this with us. And I'm excited to share the slides and your contact information so everybody can stay in touch with you. Evelyn, thank you for being here and sharing your stories. Also, it was really nice to meet you. Yeah, thank you guys so much. So pregnant friends and clients to Centering Pregnancy. And if they need anything else, Birthsmarter is a source for them. And if any of you would like to be in touch with me about community conversations or additional information in any way, you can just, I'm very easily accessible on the internet. Okay, have a great day, everybody. I'm so excited to post the recording of this.
Thank you, Ashley. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Good evening.